Hey Bryan, so we're back. We're in another week of our Wi-Fi podcast.
Yeah. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday! Yeah, we got a lot of subjects to talk about today. People have been asking us about, right?
Yeah, we don't have to talk about them all. That's a lot.
We'll try to hit on a lot of these because they're timely subjects. I think.
They are. I mean, you could do like a deep dive into them. So.
And again, ask us in the comments if you have any detailed questions about any of these topics we're talking about today. So the first thing I want to hit on is private MAC addresses with iOS. So there's an option, or it's not even an option. By default, iOS gives out randomized MAC addresses for each SSID that you connect to.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah, I mean that we kind of went through that process last week where we had a customer say that MAC blocking wasn't working.
Yes.
And so every time you go to a different, and he had multiple SSIDs.
Yep.
And he was going to the different SSIDs, and he was getting, they were the one device was showing up on the client list with different MAC addresses, basically.
Yeah. So that randomized MAC address or private address feature on iOS, you can turn it on and off on the phone. So you'd actually have to go into the Wi-Fi network and turn it off on the phone. But then there's a feature in the Genius Cloud that will block all randomized MAC addresses, right?
Yeah. Yep.
I'm going to show that right now real quick. So basically if you check that box off there, it's going to block all randomized MAC addresses. So if you're doing any kind of MAC authentication, you'll have to instruct the users to go and disable that on the iPhone. Disable the private address feature.
Right. Yep.
Otherwise, they're going to get blocked. But
yeah, so when you I'll explain where it's at.
Yeah.
On the interface.
Yep.
But if you just go into.
Oh, I did. I just showed the screenshot.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Did you show them how to get there?
Yeah. Well, you can explain it.
Yeah, it's really easy. Like, there's that vertical menu. There's a vertical menu on the left. You just go to Configure, and then go under General Settings. And under General Settings, you can choose Network AP or Switch. You choose AP, and you scroll down, and it's under there.
Yep.
And you can enable that feature there, which is block random MAC connections.
Yep.
So you can include it there or enable it there.
Okay. So so if anyone's using a Genius Cloud and they're trying to do MAC authentication and it's not working, that's why. It's not that it doesn't work, it's that the iPhone's giving out random MAC addresses, so you're not going to be able to block it.
Are the other vendors doing that, do you know?
Not that I know of. I haven't looked into it that much. I mean, people don't generally use MAC authentication that much. I mean, I know you run into it quite a bit, but I guess, it's not really a secure authentication anyway, but I know a lot of people want to do it still, so I don't run into it personally very much.
Yeah.
All right, so that's that one. Now, I want to talk about troubleshooting a PC that won't connect to Wi-Fi. So let's say you have, all your devices are connecting fine, but you have this one PC, Windows PC, that's not able to connect to the Wi-Fi. Don't blame it on the Wi-Fi network. Don't start, making changes, rebooting stuff. Like, if it's just one, it's most likely something to do with that PC. So what I recommend is to go into your device manager, delete the Wi-Fi adapter in the device manager on the PC, and tell it to leave the drivers. Don't delete the drivers, and then just do a refresh in device manager. It should find that adapter again and set it up again. It'll set it up with all its default settings. All the passwords that were cached will be removed and all that in case anything was typed in wrong. So it gives you like a fresh start, and then go and connect. That fixes the problem most of the time. I saw it happen this week. I told him to do this, and it fixed it for him. So don't beat your head against the wall if one device won't connect. It's probably that device.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's not a firmware fix. It's not a.
Right. Don't start looking at the Wi-Fi. Always look at the easiest thing first. Don't blame the Wi-Fi if it's just one device, right?
Everybody wants to blame the Wi-Fi.
So, while we're talking about firmware, do you want to talk about the firmware updates in the cloud? Why you need them and why you shouldn't worry about them?
So, if you're not using cloud, I'll explain it. So, in cloud, you can schedule firmware updates for random times during the week. You can set that up, and firmware will updates will happen during those times. So, for example, by default, ours is Sunday between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. So the system will put your network into a firmware update during that time. So we've gotten requests for to be able to disable that functionality, which we don't want to do.
Right.
And the reason we want to do that is it can get you in a lot of trouble. It can get us in a lot of trouble and get the system integrator of our MSP in a lot of trouble and get the end user in a lot of trouble. And the reason we did this is we learned with our on-premise management system that if you don't force updates, you can literally spend hours on the phone trying to update your devices from one particular firmware. Maybe it's an old firmware to a newer firmware. And you even have to take the firmware into different steps. So there could be like what we call a middle firmware. So you take it from this firmware to a middle firmware to the new firmware. And if you can imagine doing that for hundreds of devices and the downtime that you would get from that. So with cloud, we don't allow firmware updates to be disabled. It has to happen because you're missing out possibly on new features or even bug fixes. But we did give customers the ability to choose a beta firmware, a stable, and a previous stable. So if you're in a particular firmware, you can always go back to the previous stable or go to a stable firmware. So it does give you that ability, but you cannot turn it off, and it's for really, really good reasons.
Yeah, because with the cloud, like you're enabling them to select one of those three versions, right? But if it was an older version, let's say they were able to stop firmware updates, then it may not be compatible with the cloud anymore. I mean, it may lose the ability to contact those access points because it's all one system, right? It's not like a standalone system that you can just like leave the firmware for 10 years, come back and it's still there. With the cloud, it's like an evolving system. So if the firmware doesn't match up with what's live in the cloud, then it's obviously not going to work right. At all.
It'll work.
Yeah. But, you're right. It will work.
It will work, but it will. Even if you have, say you have a device on the shelf for a long period of time, and then you put it on the cloud, you're taking it from that initial older firmware. Sometimes you can run into, bumps in the road when installing it. We were just talking about it in a case I was working on last week. So you could run into problems. But yeah, you don't want to disable it. You want to continue that firmware update. Anytime you call for technical support from any company, one of the first things they ask you is what firmware version you're on, and you need to upgrade it to the latest because it fixes a lot of issues that they had in the past.
And it's all automatic and it's scheduled to be the right version, from the right version to the right version. So there's nothing you have to worry about because this has all been tested ahead of time, hopefully. And and it's not like you're loading a firmware and you could possibly brick the device because it's all been tested. Obviously they're rolling out the right firmwares for each device.
Right. And you have to imagine you literally have hundreds of engineers working on these different firmwares.
Right.
Not hundreds on one particular firmware, but you have a large team of people working on these firmwares and making sure that the firmwares are right and tested and so on. So you should feel pretty comfortable with having that on.
Yep. Okay. So all right, you wanted to talk about another thing about the cloud or the Ingenious Cloud in general, the org, difference between an org and a network. I don't know if we hit on this before. Probably not.
I don't know if we talked about this before, but there's a hierarchy within our cloud system, and we get the question a lot where there's organizations and then there's network levels. Network levels are where all the configurations happen. Organization is basically the highest level within the cloud. And so we get this question a lot. If I'm a managed service provider or system integrator, should I make my customer an organization or a network? And if you haven't seen cloud, it might be hard to visualize, but you want to make your organizations, if you're MSP or VAR, you want to use organizations as customers, or customers are organizations, because you can actually hand those rights over to other customers, or to your customer. If like your contract ends, for example, you can hand that network over to your customer at the end of the contract and say, I've designed your network, everything is up and running. We're at the end of our contract. Maybe it's a 30-day contract, 60-day contract, whatever it is, and then you can hand those rights over to the end user. Say it's a school, for example. So you can hand it over to the IT administrator for that school. The other thing is you can have unlimited organizations. So you can have as many customers as you want as an MSP or a VAR or system integrator, and then you have up to 50 networks per organization. So if you're using networks for customers, you only have up to 50 to choose, and you can't hand networks over, for example.
Right. Yeah, I had a customer like this week, and I was explaining that, and he said that he only he doesn't ever want to hand these over. He's going to manage them, so he's going to put them under his business. But I mean, he could always create a second org to put 50 more if he had to, right? Like, it's not a big deal.
Yeah, you can definitely do that. If you're a managed service provider, I know a lot of business owners are like, I'm never going to let this customer go, or the contract's always going to be there, but you want to be cautious with that a little bit.
Yep.
And the fact that you can hand that organization over is a bonus.
Yeah. Now, there's settings you can make at the org level that will trickle down to all the networks in that org too?
Yeah. Well, when you look at when you look at an org, it actually gives you an overview of all the networks.
Yeah.
In the dashboard, and then you can dive into the individual networks and look at it that way. So, I mean, you can do it the way that you just explained. Yeah. Each customer is a network. You can do it that way, but I would just be cautious of that. That's all.
Okay. Okay, and then another thing we wanted to talk about, setting the local credentials for the Ingenious Cloud. So when you log in, if you don't set those credentials, you see like a little triangle in the upper left corner of the network, right?
Yeah, with an exclamation.
Or the org, right by the org, with an exclamation. It says default local credentials, right? And I just figured this out yesterday, that why I had to reset. It all goes hand in hand with like logging in locally to the switches too, right? And things like that.
Yeah, so every vendor, when you get a new device from the vendor, it has a default username and a default password. And so typically, in a lot of cases, the default username is admin, and the default password is password.
You can find that out really quick. So
the whole network is set up that way.
Yeah, no, not anymore. So you have the default username password. And the nice thing about the cloud is, instead of having to go and touch each device, you just set it in the one area, and it propagates it updates that on all the devices, right?
It updates that on all your switches, all your access points under that network, under that particular network.
Right. So once you enable that, then that exclamation goes away. And what about like local switch GUI? Like, how does that come? So then, how does that?
Yeah. So what I was going to say prior to that is, so you can pre-configure the username and password. You can change it, and then any device that's plugged into that network will take on those configurations.
Right.
You can do it today, and you have a byproduct from you 2 weeks from now. When that device comes online and it's assigned to that network, it takes on those the new username and password. So that's a great thing. The other thing that you're getting ready to talk about is enabling the local GUI on the switch.
Yes.
So all the cloud switches are basically hybrid switches. So they can be managed by cloud, by EasyMaster, by SkyKey, or through like SNMP, or just locally through the interface, like directly to the interface. I can log into the interface or into the local GUI.
The web GUI. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but if it's assigned to cloud, you can actually lock people out from logging in locally. I mean, you can log in.
Right.
Granted, they have to know the username and the password before they do this.
Yep.
So that's another reason why you want to change it. If you haven't changed it, they can log in. But if you disable the local GUI, it will only give you troubleshooting
It won't
feature.
even let you in. Let me think about that for a second. Oh yeah, you're right. You're right. So if you disable it, it gives you the troubleshooting
Yeah, it gives you
information.
basically 2 pages
Yeah.
of information.
Right, which I sent you the other day. It tells you this connectivity to the servers and DNS and all that.
That's right. Yeah. So it does give you that ability to go in and troubleshoot it in regards to the connection to cloud. But if you enable the GUI, which can be all this can be all done in the cloud, you can enable the GUI. It will give you full layer 2 features within the switch, and you can do VLAN mirroring, link aggregation. You can do whatever you want within the switch. You can look at ports statistics and so on. So even though that the switch is connected to the cloud, you can go into the local GUI and look at all these different features, layer 2 features of the switch itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only if you enable that GUI.
And any feature that's in the cloud, like you mentioned VLAN, so like anything that's already in the cloud, like VLANs, it's going to overwrite whatever local changes you make on that switch, right?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
I forgot that. We had this actually happen yesterday. So if your plan is to take a cloud switch, I don't care if it's from us or for somebody else. I think it should be all the same. The process should be the same. If you're going to tie it to the cloud, you do not want to go into the switch, pre-configure the switch, and then tie it to the cloud. So
Right.
you want to put all those configurations in the cloud, because if you locally configure the switch, tie it to the cloud's going to say, oh, this is a new switch. There's no configurations within the cloud, so I'm just going to throw on whatever is on there. Maybe it's credentials. So it's going to wipe
It's going to overwrite
out.
those configurations. But what's an example of like a local setting that's not in the cloud? Like maybe there definitely is some settings in there. Trying to think, like maybe spanning tree or something like that is in there that may not be in the cloud.
It's really specific. I can't remember.
So if there's something you're looking for, a setting that you don't see in the cloud, and you see it on that local GUI, then you can modify that, and it should be okay.
It won't get overwritten.
Yeah. But
all of the features in the cloud will be overwritten on the local device.
Right. Oh, so I think an example of something you have to do locally is like trunking, port trunking or something like that, right? That's not in the cloud yet?
No, you can't port trunk.
Oh, you can. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying it's kind of hard to. It's particular features. Like
Okay.
If you're looking to do, but what we did is we took a majority of the most popular or the most used, not popular, but most used features of a switch, and we applied those to cloud. Now, if there's specific things that you're trying to do, and there's a feature that you're trying to enable that's not in the cloud, you can go to the local interface and turn that on.
Yep. And there's troubleshooting info in the local interface too that you might not see in the cloud, like retransmits, things like that, and the ports, info like that you might not see in the cloud.
Yeah, or like testing cable length, or
cable test, diagnostic utilities, things like that are in there. Okay.
Yeah. Now there is plans to add that within the cloud, so that will become.
So basically, there's not much reason to use that local switch GUI unless you're not going to use the cloud. Basically, you're not going to tie that switch to the cloud right now.
You
maybe
could use it to look at the different port statistics.
Yeah.
Like if there's any errors on there.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we typically use it. Another good thing to bring up is that all cloud devices for Ingenious, I don't know about other manufacturers, but when the device connects to the cloud, it takes on the configurations locally, so they're stored locally. So if it ever loses connection with the cloud, it still will work and function totally fine. That's true for access points, and that's true for switches.
Right. So even like we said before, like if it was sitting in a closet, a pre-configured switch and access point were sitting in a closet, and you took it out, plugged in, it's going to start working again. No matter, it's just going to start working again. Now, and it'll upgrade its firmware as soon as possible, right? When it's scheduled to. Um, okay, so the other thing you wanted to hit on two-factor authentication also. Why is that
Yeah,
important?
I didn't want to go into great detail on two-factor authentication. It was more of a reminder. If you're going to enable two-factor authentication, you have the ability to do two-factor authentication on your different networks and also your personal account.
Mm-hmm.
But the one thing that a lot of what we found is nobody saves the recovery codes. I don't know why.
Okay.
But in the process of setting up two-factor authentication, you have there's the option, not the option, it walks you through saving recovery codes. And the reason you have recovery codes is if, for example, you're using your phone to two-factor authentication because you're using maybe like Google Authenticator.
Yeah.
Where like when you log in every day, you have to check your Google Authenticator and you have to put in a particular code. Well, if you lose your phone, then you're kind of out of luck. And that's where these recovery codes come into play.
Yeah.
Recovery codes can be stored or saved somewhere, and you can use the recovery codes in case you lose your phone, or say maybe you left your phone at home and you're in the office and you're trying to log in, you don't have your phone. You have to use the recovery codes.
In Google Authenticator, you gotta be careful with, because even if, like, let's say you set up a new phone or you delete the app from your phone, like, it starts over blank again. So if you put in network seeds, you can't recover those. Like with Authenticator, it's based. So if you delete the app or you like get a new phone, then all that stuff goes away. So I mean, I would use just SMS 2FA. I know it, probably isn't the most secure, but that's what I like to use.
Well, I was surprised. I was surprised how many people lose their phones or get rid of their phones. I guess they're. I look at it. I guess it's point of view, but
not me. I take my good care of mine. So all right. So the last thing you wanted to hit on was high channeling utilization.
Yeah. So, I mean, we can talk about it, I guess.
So did you run into a problem this week? You run into a problem this week with?
No, I've gotten this we get this question. So we have an alert on our dashboard where it shows high channel utilization.
Yeah.
So high channel utilization is, you typically get that if you have some sort of interference in your environment, or you have co-channel interference, or interference from like a device, a client device, for example, or some other device. And the question is, where do I change that, or what do I do? And it's hard to kind of talk about, but I'll try to talk about it. So if you have high channel utilization, the first thing you want to do is review your access point channel settings and maybe your radio settings. So you want to review it there. Within our cloud system, you can actually review it in what we call as the AP list, and you can actually compare the access points with one another, and it will show you which access point is showing the high channel utilization. Within there, you can make actual adjustments to like the channels, the output power, and so on. So it's just giving you an indication that there could be a problem, but it does not necessarily mean that there's a problem. Like you might see a spike. So if there's a spike, then channel utilization or high channel utilization might come up in your dashboard. Might not be an issue, but it might be something to look at. And if you're, worst case, if you are seeing like client disconnects, for example, then you probably have a problem, and then you should make adjustments based off of that.
So for example, like if you had like 40 megahertz channels set on 2.4 gigahertz, and you had like 3 access points in the building, you're gonna see high utilization, right? Like because they're gonna be stepping at each other.
Yeah, that's one. And then if you're on 80 megahertz and you have like 6 access points, in the 5 gigahertz
right next to each other, then you'll see that too. So that's what's causing that, and so the high channel utilization is just like a diagnostic that's saying, hey, there's too many retransmits going on here, something's not right.
And so it's not necessarily like I said, it could be a spike. So it could have like been a one-off type of thing, so you don't necessarily have to make a major change or anything, but it's just saying, hey, take a look at this. If you're getting disconnects, for example, maybe this is a part of it, part of the problem or something.
All right, sounds good. All right, so you gonna have some beers this weekend?
Yeah. I got a new beer from West Coast. It's an IPA.
Nice.
I'm gonna try.
Are they a sponsor yet?
They're not a sponsor, but
All right.
West Coast.
All right. Well, we'll try those out. See if they. I'll see if they have that on the East Coast.
If you have on the East Coast.
I don't know. Maybe they'll have it out here. I'll check it out.
I think they do. Yeah.
Okay. I'll check it out. All right. So, everyone, have a good weekend. Remember to like and subscribe for more help with Wi-Fi.